This is the exact moment Ursula von der Leyen prayed would never arrive. Because what just happened in Europe isn't a disagreement. It isn't a policy fight. It isn't even a crisis. It's a political mutiny, a rebellion from the inside, led not by enemies, but by the very countries Brussels thought it controlled. For years, Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia played along. They nodded politely. They agreed. They stayed quiet. And Brussels mistook silence for obedience. But that silence was not surrender. It was the quiet breath before the explosion. And this week, the explosion happened. In one coordinated strike, the Central European bloc, the spine, slammed their borders shut to Ukrainian grain. Not with protests, not with riots, not with flags on fire. No, they did it with cold, precise policy. The one thing Brussels never expected them to use against it. And suddenly, the EU's carefully crafted illusion of unity shattered like glass. Mainstream media rushed to call it a trade dispute. But behind closed doors, officials aren't calling it trade. They're calling it insurrection. And it gets darker. Because what triggered this rebellion wasn't just economics. It wasn't just farmers. It wasn't just cheap grain. It was a bombshell accusation dropped by Viktor Orbán that ripped the diplomatic mask clean off. According to Orbán, the crisis in Ukraine isn't just a war. He claims it has mutated into something far more sinister, a war mafia, a system of corruption, vanished funds, and unaccounted billions. And instead of demanding answers, Orbán argues that Brussels did the unthinkable. They doubled down. Ursula von der Leyen, facing inflation, energy collapse, and historic cost of living pressure in Europe, reportedly pushed a demand for another 100 billion euros in funding, to the same system Orbán claims is leaking money like a sinking ship. Think about that. European families struggling with bills, European farmers drowning in debt, European industries being crushed, and Brussels, Orbán claims, wants to shovel billions more into a foreign war economy that refuses transparency. That was the first betrayal. But the second betrayal? It hit the farms. Because the grain coming from Ukraine, that Brussels promised would go to starving nations in Africa, didn't go anywhere. According to Central European leaders, it stopped right in their markets. It flooded their silos. It crushed their farmers. Imagine being forced to compete with imports that ignore every rule your government forces on you. No pesticide limits. No environmental rules. No labor protections. No regulations. It wasn't competition. It was demolition. Farmers watched their grain rot while imports were sold for prices so low they couldn't even cover the cost of seeds. But Brussels called it a temporary imbalance. Temporary imbalance? No. For these countries, it became an existential threat. And when people's survival is threatened, politics becomes a battlefield. That's why Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia acted. They didn't care about EU law. They didn't care about threats. They didn't care about Ursula's warnings. They cared about their people, and they told Brussels, "We will not let our citizens starve so you can feel morally superior." This rebellion didn't take place in streets. It took place in cabinets, ministries, and parliaments. It was executed by prime ministers, not protesters. And now, Brussels is trapped. If the EU attacks Poland, they risk pushing away one of their strongest military allies. If they target Hungary alone, they prove Orbán's entire argument about double standards. If they punish Slovakia, they risk cracking the entire eastern front of the Union. Europe's unity has been exposed as a myth held together by fear, not partnership. And the revolt is spreading. The same bloc that shut down grain imports is now resisting migrant quotas, resisting funding packages, resisting energy mandates, resisting Brussels itself. This isn't the beginning of a conversation. It's the beginning of a power shift. For decades, Western Europe wrote the rules. Eastern Europe followed them. Not anymore. Today, Warsaw, Budapest, and Bratislava are sending a message louder than any EU speech. You don't own us. We are not colonies. We are nations, and we are done obeying. And that is Ursula von der Leyen's nightmare scenario. Because once a union realizes it doesn't need to obey, it stops being a union and starts being a battlefield. The rebellion is no longer quiet. The transformation of Europe has begun, and this time, Brussels can't stop it.